I exposed my stepmother's financial lies, and it ruined my family. Lena sat at her desk, staring out the window of her small, but tastefully decorated office. The city stretched out before her, the skyline an endless testament to the ambition that had driven her since she was a teenager. The weight of the years of hard work, the sacrifices, and the relentless drive to escape her past was finally paying off. Her career was on an upward trajectory, her apartment was cozy, and for the first time in her life, she could breathe easy. But the calm was fragile, like a mirror just waiting to shatter. She had worked tirelessly to carve out this life for herself, distancing herself from the toxic environment that had marked her childhood. Growing up, her home was anything but a place of safety and comfort. Her mother had left when Lena was just a child, and her father, once a strong and independent man, had slowly wilted under the shadow of his second wife, Veronica. Veronica had been charming when they first met, a woman with an impeccable sense of style, a confident smile, and a way of making everything seem effortless. She'd quickly won Lena's father's heart, but over the years, the cracks in Veronica's carefully constructed persona began to show. It wasn't long before Lena saw her for who she truly was: manipulative, self-serving, and prone to playing the role of the victim whenever things didn't go her way. Despite Lena's best efforts to distance herself from the family, Veronica's shadow still loomed large. And now, as Lena sat in her office, a gnawing sense of unease was creeping up her spine. It was always there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder that the past wasn't as far behind her as she wanted to believe. Lena's phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. It was a text from her younger brother, Mark. "You hear about Veronica? She's in deep trouble at work. Word on the street is she's getting demoted." Lena frowned. It wasn't a surprise. Veronica's professional life had been a house of cards for years. She was charming, yes, but not particularly competent. Her role in the company had always been inflated, her successes often credited to others' hard work. Still, hearing it from Mark was different. It meant the situation was dire. "What happened?" Lena typed back. A few seconds later, the response came. "I'm not sure yet, but it sounds like she's in financial trouble too. Dad's not doing well either. He's been on edge for weeks." Lena's stomach twisted. Her father, once the center of her world, had become a shadow of the man he used to be. After his early retirement, he had slowly retreated into himself, allowing Veronica to take charge of their finances. And from what Lena had heard, she had not been careful with that power. "Let me know if you find out more," Lena replied, her mind already racing. She had always kept her distance from her father and his new family, but something told her that this time she might not be able to stay out of it. Over the next few days, Lena heard more whispers about Veronica's troubles. The demotion was just the beginning. Rumors about her financial mismanagement began circulating, and Lena's concern deepened when she learned that her father's name had been involved in some of the loans Veronica had taken out. It was a familiar pattern. Veronica, always chasing a life of luxury, had pulled her father into a financial web without him even knowing. Lena had always been skeptical of Veronica's ability to manage money, but this was something else. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply her father had been affected. He had been so blinded by Veronica's charm, so desperate to keep the peace in their home, that he had let her take control of everything. One afternoon, Lena decided to take matters into her own hands. She visited the county clerk's office and started digging through public records. It didn't take long for her to uncover a disturbing pattern. Veronica had taken out several loans in her father's name over the years. Loans he had never signed for or even been aware of. Each loan seemed to coincide with a major purchase or an extravagant vacation Veronica had insisted on. Lena's mind raced as she pieced together the information. It was clear now. Veronica had been living beyond their means for years, and her father had been none the wiser. That evening, Lena called her father. The conversation was awkward at first, but she eventually broached the topic. She had never liked confronting her father, especially when it came to Veronica. He was so fragile, so easily swayed by her charm. But this was different. Lena couldn't sit idly by and watch him drown in debt. "Dad," she said gently, "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What is it, Lena?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I've been looking into some of the loans Veronica took out. A few of them are in your name, and I think you need to see what's been going on." Lena could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. She knew her father well enough to understand that this wasn't going to be easy for him. He had always been so trusting of Veronica, so willing to let her handle things. "I don't think I'm ready to hear this," he muttered. "Dad, please," Lena said, her voice firm. "You need to know the truth. I'm only doing this because I care about you. I don't want to see you get hurt." Another long silence followed. Finally, her father spoke, his voice cracking. "I always thought she was doing what was best for us," he said softly. "I never questioned it." Lena's heart ached. She knew he wanted to believe in Veronica, wanted to believe that everything was okay. But now, the truth was inescapable. "Let me come over and show you," Lena said. "We'll go through it together." The conversation ended soon after, and Lena knew the path she had just set them on wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. This time, she wouldn't back down. Lena arrived at her father's house later that evening, her heart heavy with anticipation. She hadn't seen him in weeks, and the house still felt strangely unfamiliar to her. It wasn't that it had changed, but something in her father had. He'd always been the steady, reliable figure in her life. And now, the man who had once been her rock seemed smaller, more fragile. The front door opened before she had the chance to knock. Her father, a man who had once stood tall and proud, now looked older and more tired than she remembered. "Lena," he said quietly, his expression a mix of apprehension and relief. He stepped aside to let her in. "Come in." The house was dimly lit, the soft glow of lamps casting shadows on the walls. Lena followed her father into the living room, where he motioned for her to sit. A pot of tea was brewing on the stove, and she could hear the faint bubbling from the kitchen. Her father was always one for small rituals, the kind of man who found comfort in routine. "I didn't know what to expect," he said, sitting down across from her. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his sweater. "But I'm glad you came." Lena nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Dad, I need to show you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder filled with documents. She could see the way his eyes flickered nervously as she placed it in front of him. He didn't take it immediately. Instead, he stared at it, as if he were waiting for the moment to pass. "I don't know if I'm ready," he murmured, his voice almost pleading. "I know this is hard," Lena said, her voice calm but firm. "But it's better to face it now than let it keep hanging over us." With a heavy sigh, her father opened the folder. Lena watched as he scanned the pages one by one. His expression grew more tense, the lines in his face deepening with each new piece of information. "These are loans," he said, his voice shaking. Loans I never signed for. I didn't even know about these. Lena nodded. They're in your name, Dad. Veronica took them out without you knowing. I've been digging around, and it looks like this has been going on for years. Her father's face paled as he flicked through the rest of the pages. But she told me everything was fine. She said we could afford the house, the vacations, all of it. I know, Lena said softly. That's how she operates. She's good at making people believe everything is fine, even when it's falling apart. But the truth is, she's been living beyond her means for a long time. Her father looked up from the papers, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Why would she do this to us? Why didn't she just tell me? We've always been a team. Lena's heart ached for him. She knew this wasn't easy to hear, and yet it had to be said. I think she took advantage of you, Dad. She got comfortable, and when things started going wrong, she just kept digging a bigger hole, hoping no one would notice. And now, it's all coming to light. The room fell silent as her father processed what she had just said. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the floor, as if searching for an answer that wasn't there. I never saw it, he said softly. I always trusted her, Lena. I thought she was doing what was best for us, for me. I know, Lena said gently, but you're not alone in this. We can figure it out together. Her father sat up straighter, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. I don't know where to begin. This is more than I ever expected. Lena nodded. I'll help you through it. We'll get everything sorted. But first, we need to have a conversation with Veronica. She needs to be held accountable for this. Her father's eyes flickered with fear. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Veronica? She's always been so convincing. She'll make it sound like I'm the one who's wrong. I'll be there with you, Lena said firmly. We'll face this together. The next morning, Lena and her father made the decision to confront Veronica. It wasn't something her father wanted to do, but Lena knew it was the only way to move forward. Veronica's manipulation had gone on long enough. Lena didn't bother calling ahead. She knew Veronica wouldn't take the news well, and any advance warning would only give her time to prepare a defense. They arrived at Veronica and her father's home around noon. The house was as pristine as ever, with its perfectly manicured lawn and carefully curated interior. Veronica's idea of comfort was always about appearances, not substance. Veronica opened the door before they had a chance to knock. She was wearing her usual smile, the one that had charmed everyone for years. Well, she said, stepping aside to let them in. What a pleasant surprise. Lena followed her father into the living room. The tension was thick in the air. Veronica closed the door behind them and turned, still wearing that infuriating smile. So what's this all about? Veronica asked, her tone light and casual, though Lena could hear the edge of anxiety in her voice. She knew something was coming. Dad, you should sit down, Lena said. This isn't easy to hear. Her father sank into one of the chairs, looking like a man who had already lost the fight before it even started. Veronica, however, remained standing, arms crossed, her smile still firmly in place. What's going on, Henry? She asked, her voice suddenly sweet. Lena, you've got that look in your eye. Lena didn't mince words. Veronica, we need to talk about the loans. The ones you took out in Dad's name. He didn't know about them, and it's time you owned up to it. Veronica's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. What are you talking about? I've always handled the finances. I know what I'm doing. Lena's eyes narrowed. You've been living beyond your means, Veronica, and now it's catching up with us. Dad's going to be in debt for the rest of his life if we don't fix this. You need to take responsibility for what you've done." Veronica's face hardened and her tone shifted. "You think I'm the problem here? You think I've been wasting money?" "I think you've been lying to Dad for years," Lena shot back. "You've taken advantage of him, and it's time for you to face the consequences." For the first time, Veronica's mask slipped. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she took a step forward. "You don't know what you're talking about, Lena. You've always had a chip on your shoulder. You've always been jealous of me." Lena's father looked between them, his face drawn and pale. "Veronica, what's going on?" he asked weakly. Veronica turned to him, her voice softening. "Henry, you need to understand that Lena is just trying to cause trouble. She doesn't understand the decisions I've made. I've always tried to protect us." Lena's blood boiled. "You've been hiding things from him, manipulating him into thinking everything was fine when it wasn't. That's not protecting him." The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, no one spoke. Veronica's eyes darted between Lena and her father, trying to regain control of the situation. But the cracks were already visible. "I didn't do anything wrong," Veronica said, her voice trembling. "I've always had your best interests at heart, Henry. You just don't see it." Her father looked at her, the truth settling in like a heavy weight. "I see it now, Veronica," he whispered. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and emotional conversations. Veronica's life began to unravel in the wake of her financial mismanagement. The company she had worked for, the one that had once admired her charm and leadership, let her go. Without her high-paying job, she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she had carefully crafted. The house was put up for sale, and soon after, Veronica moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. Her world, once filled with luxury and control, had crumbled. Lena and her father spent the next several months repairing the damage, both financial and emotional. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Lena thought they might not make it. But little by little, her father began to regain his independence, and they started to rebuild their lives. Months passed, and life seemed to stabilize. Lena and her father had worked tirelessly to get things back on track. Her father was slowly regaining his financial footing, no longer shackled by the loans and debts that Veronica had imposed on him. The stress in his life, though still present, was now manageable. And although Lena's heartache over the betrayal lingered, she felt a sense of relief that at least her father was no longer under Veronica's grip. But the ripple effects of Veronica's actions reached further than just financial ruin. The family was fractured, and even though Lena had hoped that the truth would bring about some healing, it only deepened the divide. Veronica, once a powerful figure in their family, had become isolated. Her influence had evaporated, and with it, her relationships began to fray. Ginny, Lena's younger half-sister, stood by Veronica without question. The loyalty she held for her mother was unwavering, despite the evidence that had been laid bare. Mark, Lena's older brother, was less certain. While he hadn't been as close to Veronica as Ginny had, the years of manipulation had left scars on him as well. Mark had been watching quietly from the sidelines, but now he was questioning everything, especially Veronica's role in the family. One afternoon, Lena received a call from Mark. It had been a while since they'd spoken directly, and the sound of his voice on the other end of the line gave her a sense of unexpected comfort. "Lena, we need to talk," he said, his voice tense but calm. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I think it's time we face this head-on." Lena agreed to meet him at a cafe near her apartment. She hadn't realized just how much she had missed him until she saw him sitting at a corner table, waiting for her. Mark had always been the protector of the family, even when things were complicated. Seeing him again reminded her of how important it was to have someone on her side who understood the weight of their shared history. When Lena sat down, Mark didn't waste any time. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone heavy with sincerity. "I should have stood up to her sooner. I should have questioned Veronica's decisions before things got this far." Lena shook her head. "It wasn't your fault, Mark. You weren't the one in the middle of it all. You didn't have the same relationship with her that Ginny and I did, but I appreciate you saying that." Mark took a deep breath, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I've been talking to Jenny. She's not doing well with all of this. I don't know how to help her. She's convinced herself that Veronica was just trying to protect us, that it was all for the best. I don't think she's ready to face the truth yet," Lena replied, her voice soft but resolute. "I get it, Mark. Ginny is in denial. It's easier for her to hold onto the illusion that everything was fine. But I don't know how long she can keep living in that fantasy." Mark's expression hardened. "It's just, everything feels broken now. I don't know how to fix it. I want to move forward, but Ginny can't let go of the past. She's stuck." Lena nodded slowly. "I've tried to help her, but I can't do it for her. We all have to make our own decisions about where we go from here. But I'm here for you, Mark. I'm here for Dad. We'll figure this out." The conversation lingered in the air as they both sat quietly for a while. Lena knew this was the beginning of something new. Mark was finally coming to terms with everything. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy for any of them. In the weeks that followed, Veronica's world continued to unravel. Her financial woes only worsened as creditors came knocking at her door, demanding payment for the loans she had taken out in her father's name. The small apartment she had moved into was a far cry from the mansion she had once lived in, and the constant stress was taking a toll on her. Lena kept her distance, refusing to engage with Veronica unless absolutely necessary. The confrontation they had had earlier in the year had left her with little desire to relive the past, especially with someone who had betrayed her family so thoroughly. But as Veronica's situation grew direr, there were moments when she reached out, messages left unanswered, phone calls ignored. One afternoon, Lena received an unexpected visit from her father. He arrived at her apartment unannounced, his face lined with worry. Without a word, he sat down across from her, his eyes heavy with concern. "Lena," he began softly, "Veronica's in trouble." Lena raised an eyebrow. She had heard the whispers about Veronica's financial collapse, but she hadn't expected her father to bring it up. "What kind of trouble?" Her father hesitated, rubbing his hands together nervously. She's been asking me for help. She's lost everything, her job, the house. She's even behind on rent for the apartment. And now, there's a chance she might lose custody of Jenny." Lena's stomach churned at the thought. "What does that have to do with you?" "She's been telling me that she has no one else to turn to," her father said, his voice faltering. "She's begging me to help her, but I don't know if I can. I'm not sure what's best anymore." Lena looked at her father, feeling a sense of both empathy and anger. She could see the conflict in his eyes. The man who had always been a rock for her was now in turmoil over whether to help the woman who had destroyed his life. "You don't have to help her," Lena said gently but firmly. "You've already done enough. She made her choices. It's time for her to face the consequences." Her father nodded slowly, though there was still uncertainty in his eyes. "I know. But it's hard, Lena. It's hard to turn my back on her, especially when she's asking for my help. Lena reached across the table, placing her hand on his. I'm here for you, Dad. Whatever you decide, I'll be here. The days that followed were filled with a sense of unease. Veronica's situation continued to deteriorate, and Lena knew that the moment would come when they would have to confront her once more. But this time, the confrontation wouldn't be about finances. It would be about the damage she had done to their family. One evening, Lena called a family meeting. She knew this was the only way to bring everything to a head, to allow her father, Jenny, Mark, and herself the chance to have closure. The tension was palpable as they all gathered in the living room. Jenny, as expected, was defensive. Veronica, though present, kept her eyes lowered, avoiding direct contact with anyone. Lena stood at the center, taking a deep breath before speaking. We've been through a lot, but it's time we all face the truth. Veronica's actions have torn this family apart. She lied, manipulated, and caused irreparable harm to all of us. And while I understand the desire to protect her, we can't continue to ignore what she's done. Veronica looked up, her eyes narrowed in anger. You think you're better than me, Lena? You think you're the only one who's been hurt? Lena didn't flinch. I don't think I'm better than you, Veronica, but I am done enabling you. The damage you've caused is too great, and it's time for all of us to stop pretending that everything is fine. Jenny stood up, her face flushed with anger. You don't understand. Mom did what she had to do to protect us. You're the one who's tearing us apart. Lena's gaze softened as she looked at her sister. Jenny, I wish you could see the truth, but I can't keep pretending either. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as the weight of Lena's words settled in. In the weeks that followed, the family's dynamics shifted. Veronica, unable to repair the damage she had done, drifted further away from them. Jenny, torn between loyalty to her mother and the realization of the truth, struggled with her own emotions. But Lena remained resolute, her father's support a steady force by her side. Though the path ahead was uncertain, Lena knew that the family she had once known could never be fully restored. But perhaps, just maybe, there was a chance for a new kind of healing. A healing built on truth, trust, and the understanding that some relationships, no matter how broken, could never be fixed. As Lena continued to rebuild her life, she found solace in the knowledge that she had done the right thing, even if it meant letting go of the past. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, Lena felt the weight of her family's toxicity lifting, replaced with the quiet hope of a brighter future.